This morning I was playing music from the artists that were featured around Saxon Sound System because I was talking about Dancehall Takeover that One Extra had last week, where Saxon were featured on the early hours of Friday morning. So I left the studio, and this afternoon I met up with a good friend of mine and journalist Guy Smith. Guy is up here to do some work with me on a couple of stories that we're covering. And Guy said to me, "George, have you heard the news?" I said, "What news, Guy?" Anyway, Guy is here with me. So, Guy, can you tell us what the news is?
Police watchdog, the IPCC, the Independent Police Complaints Commission, is investigating the death of David Emmanuel, who many will remember as Smiley Culture. He had 2 hits in the 1980s, namely the singles Police Officer and Cockney Translation. His death happened during a police raid at around 7 o'clock this morning. Met police officers from the Serious Organised Crime Command were carrying out an arrest at a house in Warlingham in Surrey. Unconfirmed reports suggest Emmanuel suffered a stab wound which was believed to be self-inflicted. We'll know more about that once a post-mortem examination is carried out. That's expected within the next few days. Emmanuel was facing a trial at Croydon Crown Court next Monday, the 21st of March, for conspiracy to supply cocaine. He was arrested in July last year and charged in September. He was on bail and therefore was at this property in Surrey. I'm told today's arrest was unconnected with the current charge of drug dealing. The IPCC investigators are at the house now in Warlingham, looking at the scene, talking to neighbours, anyone who saw or heard anything this morning. Clearly they'll be looking at how the Met planned and then carried out the arrest, which officers were actually involved, and to try and find out exactly what happened. I've been talking to a number of people who knew him, and he was a South London born and bred. He went to school in Tulse Hill and was clearly influential in the reggae scene.
Just level vibes, son.
Thanks, Guy. Now, on the phone line now, I've got a gentleman who I worked with many years ago at Capital Radio, and I mentioned that because he was the first person to play any of Smiley Culture's music. I'm talking about David Rodigan. So, good evening, David.
Good evening. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, he was a stalwart of sound system culture in London, and he was a pioneer who revolutionized the style of MCing. Smiley Culture, along with Asha Senator and Peter King, were at the vanguard of British MCing. They revolutionized that style, because until that moment in time when they came along and the Saxon fraternity came along, MCing was primarily a Jamaican genre, popularized in the dancehalls of Kingston and island-wide. What Smiley Culture did was he took his own native London twang and slang and turned it on its head. One of the best examples of that was Cockney Translation. I remember playing that on the radio in Jamaica with Barry G, and it absolutely blew Jamaica away that he was able to use Cockney slang and Jamaican slang and twist it and turn it in the way that he did. He also was brilliant at riding rhythms, and of course that's the essence of being a good DJ. And of course it was Police Officer that really made his name. Again, humour fused with his ability to ride rhythms and top British production. That period was very important for reggae music, British reggae music. Aswad and Steel Pulse and so on and so forth. They were the musicians, the singers and players of the instruments, but that whole revolution of British MCs, well, Smiley Culture was, as I say, one of the leaders of that genre.
Thanks, David. On the other line, I've got a man who you'll hear most weekends on 5 Live. He's also the CEO of Colour Telly and was, during the 1980s, the music editor for The Voice newspaper. I'm talking about Dotun Adebayo. Dotun, what are your memories of Smiley Culture?
Well, I think there are a few people who understand what's going on in the reggae world who are any longer surprised by the untimely death of a reggae star, however bizarre it is. And as far as we understand, this was a particularly bizarre incident. What David Rodigan was saying there is totally right. Rodigan knows the history of reggae like the back of his hand, and it was on Rodigan's show that we first here in Britain, let alone in Jamaica, heard Smiley Culture's Cockney Translation and the rest of the Saxon posse output from Me God Me King by Papa Levi and so on. But what Smiley did on a non-musical level, Smiley made it okay for guys like you and I to chat Cockney without being regarded as coconuts. And he made it okay for a lot of white guys to chat Yardie without being thought of as wiggers or whatever they want to call them. And he has transformed the culture of Britain by allowing black Britons to have an identity. He's the original cheeky chappie at a time when most people in Britain thought that Lenny Henry was the only black guy who could have a laugh. But no, Smiley culture showed you that he could be the Charlie Chaplin of our generation, because his vocal persona was the equivalent of Charlie Chaplin's Vagabond. This is a guy that came on the scene and talked about police stopping you, harassing you in the way the police often did for young black guys driving around in London in those days. They gave us producers at an alarming rate. But whereas we were all vexed about it, Smiley had a laugh about it. He was telling you about the true life story of driving from a dance through Victoria and being pulled up by cops, and they were saying, "Where's the real Sensimania, Smiley? Where's the real Sensimania?" With that tune, Cockney translation, it was the first time any of us had heard a black guy chatting Cockney. Why should that be extraordinary? Because amongst our friends, we did it, but we wouldn't do it sort of for the record, as it were.